I will.
Not only that,
Good morning, everybody.
no, but this was.
Let's get started. Welcome to the Simons Institute for the first event of this calendar year. My name is Sampath Kannan. I'm the Associate Director here. And for those of you for whom it's the first visit to the Simons, and for those who have forgotten what it's all about, let me briefly remind you, the Simons Institute was founded in 2012 thanks to a generous grant from the Simons Foundation, and that's the grant that sustains us to this day. What we do typically is bring together researchers in theoretical computer science and allied areas for long, sustained collaboration, so meaning semester-long programs that are focused on a particular topic. This kind of workshop is not the norm for us, but we were excited by this topic, and so we agreed to do that on predictions and interventions. I have to say that having heard talks on one particular approach to this problem on conformal prediction, I thought that was it. But then when I looked at the schedule for this workshop, I see the multiplicity of perspectives. I'm really curious to hear what are all the things that you're going to talk about and how new ideas are going to emerge from this. So I want to thank the organizers for putting together such a great program. They're all sitting here. I guess as I think somebody already said, the one housekeeping rule we have is there's no food and drink allowed in this auditorium. So that's how we keep it so pristine. So hope you have a great workshop. Yeah, thanks to the organizers. And I'll hand off to Angela first.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. We just have some brief opening remarks to give some context as to the title of the workshop and some of the origins of the prior workshop, as well as some of the themes that we hope all of your work will enrich and expand. So we'll just pull up these slides.
We're going to figure all this out so all the speakers can not work. How do we let the screen down?
No, it's fine. The screen is set up to work.
Okay.
I'm more than a computer scientist. I'm more just amazed by how bad they are at IT. It's like computer science seems terrible at IT.
I'll try to show that the screen.
so I plugged it.
Yeah.
It was up for a second.
Yeah.
Let's try it again.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you escape out of the screen?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let me try that again.
So you click allow.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
There it is.
Okay. And then
there. And then you can just quit this one.
okay.
Yeah. And you're good.
Oh, perfect. Nice.
Okay, yeah, it would not be a workshop without technical difficulties, obviously. Okay, so first of all, don't be scared to sit up closer. We don't bite, for sure. But yeah, thanks to everybody for coming. People came from all over the country, literally, and we're so glad that everyone was able to make it.
And international.
Oh, and internationally, yes, as well. So thank you for flights, short and long, to come to this workshop. We think it's going to be a really exciting opportunity to address what we see as one of the primary roadblocks for designing machine learning AI systems that actually have the kind of intended social impact that we aspire to. So yeah, before we get started, so this is where you are. You're at this, in case you're confused, you're in the wrong room. This is the Bridging Prediction and Intervention Problems in Social Systems workshop. We're going to be here all week. And it's hosted by Simons, but we also benefited from a generous grant from the MacArthur Foundation as well. So thanks to our sponsors, our financial sponsors. We just wanted to give a brief shout out to other co-organizers. So me, Lydia, and Angela are the chairs of this workshop, but we got a lot of support from Tiana, Avi, Ben, who will be making himself known shortly, don't worry, and Jamie, who can't make it in person due to teaching obligations. We also wanted to thank Naomi, who was Naomi and Francis and some other folks at Simons who have been amazing in terms of logistically planning everyone's hotels and flights and everything. So, if you are here and you're happy and you're in a cozy hotel, that's because of them. So thank you to them. And so we wanted to just begin the workshop with a little bit of framing for those that don't have context as to what this event is and how this came to be. As most people know, ADS systems are just everywhere at this point. So these are automated decision systems in the criminal justice context. Think of pre-trial risk assessments. In health, there's widespread use of these clinical decision support tools. In education, there's a lot of these dropout prediction tools that are used in advising processes. Housing, 9 in 10 landlords in the US use some kind of tenant screening tool. And then, human resources, HR, a lot of, especially high turnover, high frequency jobs are mediated by these ADS tools. So they're just impacting millions and millions of people throughout the country and beyond. And one thing that if you are someone that is especially aspiring to build these models to have some kind of downstream impact, the relationship between model accuracy and model performance and that downstream impact is not always clear. So for example, in the criminal justice space, after many, almost at this point, a decade of debate, there's still a lot of mixed evidence as to whether or not the use of these risk assessments actually, reduces detainment rates or increases public safety. Similarly, not to trigger anyone in the room that works on sepsis prediction, I know it's a common health prediction task, but we've had mixed evidence for that for a long time. Accurately predicting sepsis in individual patients does increase treatment and guidance compliance, but it also leads to alert fatigue, and it also only has a minor reduction on mortality. In education, we've also had a lot of mixed evidence. So, GSU, for example, has their infamous GPA advising risk assessment, and it's led to, increases in student retention and graduation rates. But, at the K-12 level, we have almost the opposite evidence of very little impact in terms of student success. And so, as each of us were in our individual domains working on these problems, realizing that the evidence was really mixed and the relationship between model prediction accuracy and downstream impact was, poorly understood at best. That inspired us to bring a group together to have our first workshop. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually 2 years ago now, we started thinking about how can we bring a community to work on these problems together that is not only focused on solving technical problems, but also is truly interdisciplinary, because we think that prediction and intervention problems not only about any particular discipline, but really about finding ways to collaborate across disciplines. So this led to a very successful first workshop. Many of you are previous attendees of that Banff International Research Station, a BURST workshop. And so here we have everyone who attended, as well as the wildlife who also were guests of our workshop. And I think one of the things that was really valuable that came out of the workshop was a collaborative white paper, right, that all the workshop attendees worked on together that set out a research agenda on bridging prediction and intervention problems in social systems. And I think the downstream impact of that workshop has really been incredible. It's not something any of us really expected from the outset. So that has led to not just our attendees being very happy, which hopefully all of you will be as well, even if we don't have great mountains behind us, but we're here at the beautiful campus of UC Berkeley. And also there have been classes that have been taught about this topic at USC, Berkeley, Northwestern Princeton, and hopefully in all of your institutions as well. So I think this paper is really kind of one of the ways that we're trying to extend the impact of the workshop. So we'll talk a little bit about what exactly is the framework and that we sort of came to in the writing of this white paper. Okay. So are we talking about this? Okay. So here's an overview of how we think about automated decision systems. Some confusion.
Sure. So as a starting point, we want to summarize the way that people think about studying automated decision systems in a formal sense. So typically, we think about the typical formulation goes something like this. You have a data set of covariates X. You have some outcomes Y. Could be a consequential outcome like dropouts, heart attack, so on. And you want to train a predictive risk tool to estimate what is the conditional expectation prediction of Y given X. And what you might do is try to find the best risk model, try to come up with best guarantees for that predictive risk alone. What the white paper goes through is it goes through all of these examples, and it argues that really implicitly there's another formulation that better reflects the kind of complexities of what people are trying to do on the ground to try to actually improve outcomes, not only predict them. And so one main thing that we want to do is expand this kind of basic pure prediction formulation and specifically highlight what are the kinds of decisions that organizations or institutions are making in order to try to actually not only predict outcomes, but also improve them. And so how we're doing this, we're expanding this default problem formulation to try to separate out the kind of like pure predictive information from how, for example, a decision maker in the loop perceives that information. That's our kind of idea of judgment. If you have a predictive risk score of like 76%, but you show it to a non-technical social worker or a doctor or a judge, and then you simplify that to be this is a 7 out of 10, or this is a high risk label, or this is a red flag instance versus a green flag instance. We want to separate out that judgment. You could consider this a classification label from how that actually informs the downstream decisions that themselves actually have impact on outcomes. And now in this richer formulation, we also have to think about how can we actually evaluate the impacts of predictive risk models. And so we also have to explicitly account for the idea of model changes being kind of one-to-one with policy changes and how people should make decisions. Do they see the ADS or not? So on and so forth. So we want to kind of expand this pure prediction frame to more fully take into account all of these decision processes under the hood. Yeah.
There's always an additional piece of information that is influencing the decision outside of Y hat.
Sorry, I missed.
Are you assuming there's always some additional information Z that is influencing the decision beyond Y hat?
I can explain that. Not necessarily information.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so no, not necessarily. Z, we'll go into more detail later, but think about it as like an intervention on whether you receive the decision.
Yeah, so I think that the reason the framing of the workshop is also framed as predictions and interventions is because there's sort of different communities working on different aspects of this. So like the HCI community, for example, has thought a lot about how different risk scores are interpreted as different judgments and how that might affect decisions. The causal inference crowd, for example, thinks a lot about how a policy change, so Z equaling 0 if they don't see a predictive score at all, and equaling 1 if they do see one, how that affects actions or decision actions, and how that then affects outcomes. And so one of the reasons we sort of present this is just like a kind of common language across the different communities. Machine learning folks that are very occupied about the accuracy of the risk score, causal inference folks that are sort of looking at things through the lens of a policy change, and then HCI folks that are more preoccupied with judgments and how that affects decisions. So to your point, it's it is information, but it's information of just sort of whether or not a particular practice is operating across one policy or not. So another way of thinking about it too is that judgments can happen with or without a prediction score. Like people get classified as high risk and low risk in like default bureaucratic settings independent of prediction scores. And so if you introduce a prediction score to make that classification, then that's a policy change. So that's what we were trying to capture with C.
Okay, and just to map some of those examples that we mentioned briefly, there's been many papers, many projects looking specifically at prediction in these social settings. So just to be a little more concrete, what do ADS look like in these settings? So for example, in lending, maybe you're trying to predict 2-year defaults from credit history. In healthcare, you're trying to predict sepsis from patient covariates, EHR data, dynamic vitals. Education, trying to predict dropout from grades. Criminal justice, failure to appear for trial, new criminal record, given this information. But we would argue that in all of these settings that have been studied very comprehensively in predictive risk analysis and social prediction, there's always some implicit decision process that also changes outcomes. So for example, in lending, there's a question of, if you're approved for a loan, but if you default, what happens to your credit score and how does that impact your ability to receive loans in the future? What is the interest rate? In health, there's many different kinds of interventions from operational to clinical that you might want to redirect someone to, early interventions for sepsis risk. In education, you don't only want to predict who is at risk at dropout, but you also want to try to prevent dropout. So you're not going to kind of go around to all of the students who are labeled at high risk of dropout and say, you're at high risk of dropout. Don't do that. So same thing in criminal justice. There's a whole kind of palette of interventions, supportive services that one can try to leverage to try to actually improve outcomes. So one of the main things that we want to do in this white paper is present an integrated viewpoint. So we would argue that many papers kind of focus on one of, let's say, 2 extremes. The first of these extremes is this kind of prediction-only story. So if we think about like the setting of risk assessment tools in criminal justice, we've studied this a lot in algorithmic fairness. Every jurisdiction or many jurisdictions have this kind of deployed. The main kind of evaluative criteria of the technical quality of an algorithmic decision support tool, like predicting new criminal activity from a criminal history or other covariates, would be something like the predictive accuracy of the decision model or the predictive risk tool. There's also been a lot of work on algorithmic fairness, focusing on how can you refine these performance criteria, but they're essentially concerned about the predictive quality of the prediction. Now we would contrast that prediction-only point of view to a more intervention-only point of view, which is maybe more common in, let's say, program evaluation or policy evaluation. And we would argue that this intervention-only perspective, in its coarsest sense, might consider a question like the following. Let's say that one year I deploy the risk assessment tool, and the next year let's say this year I don't deploy the risk assessment tool. Next year, I deploy the risk assessment tool. That would be a policy change in whether the risk assessment tool is being provided to the judges, let's say. So the question that we argue this intervention-only framework tends to ask is, did the deployment of the risk assessment tool improve outcomes? Did it reduce criminal activity in aggregate across the population? And so this is a very rich framework unto itself. We love causal inference. But we would argue that this is a fairly coarse, often a fairly coarse point of view on what it means to add this information or provide this decision risk tool that kind of misses a lot of what's happening in the middle. So we would argue that these are kind of 2 extremes of how algorithmic decision support tools are kind of currently being evaluated. Now, in this intervention-only point of view, we might view, let's say, the causal effect of providing this risk assessment tool as the key estimand. Does it improve outcomes on average? Now, obviously, this is a cartoon, and there's a lot of room in the middle. But we would argue that, really we need an integrated viewpoint because kind of all of this stuff in the middle is happening on the ground. And in this integrated viewpoint, we're trying to track the impact of predictive information on the actual decisions that are being made, for example, pretrial detention or not. What is the effect of such decisions on the outcome? And what is the effect of providing this predictive information on, let's say, a human decision maker in the loop, and how do they change their decision making? So we would argue that this integrated viewpoint is in fact implied by the way that current people are looking at different slices of the problem. If you compile all of the estimates that appear in the kind of pretrial risk assessment in literature, it will include this entire integrated viewpoint, but never really at the same time. So in this workshop, we're trying to take a look at everything at the same time. This will in turn show a lot of technical richness that shows up when you think about what happens in the middle. There will surely be new kind of technical challenges as well. And we're really excited about trying to open up this picture and bring all these disciplines together to look at this process in its kind of fullest form. This also requires a lot of institutional knowledge, building on the social sciences, ways of thinking about discretion, ways of understanding what current institutions are doing, the bureaucratic counterfactual, as well as integrating a lot of implementation context and domain expertise. Yeah. Right. So the way that the way that we look at this integrated viewpoint in the white paper, we break this down to 3 different kind of sections. So the first section is thinking about model design, and model design is really thinking about what are the implications of this integrated viewpoint on how we should change the technical formulations of what we're doing, moving from predictive to causal estimates. Different formulations varying from pure prediction to purely interventional in terms of how that should change our decision making.
And for evaluation science, we mainly focus, so why science? Because we want to understand not just evaluation, but what's the right way to do evaluation and how do we answer the measurement questions, right? For measuring utility, performance, or effectiveness of prediction. So I think that there are primarily 3 ways to do it, and each of them sort of focuses on different parts of the problem that Angela showed just now. So evaluating predictions is benchmarking, evaluating decisions corresponds to lab studies, so studying the human decision-making part of the process, but evaluating actions and interventions need to take place in actual field experiments in order to understand the actual impact of the policy change combined with the prediction tool. And there might be also other evaluation paradigms kind of in between these different paradigms that that might be of future work interest. Okay, and finally, yes.
And then super briefly, I think beyond sort of just thinking about evaluation, there's also sort of in other domains beyond machine learning, this notion of implementation science. So, if we look at, properties of the model and ways in which changes to the model can actually impact outcomes, that's one dimension of things. But a lot of the examples that we started this presentation with actually involve, differences or the effectiveness of the intervention design. So for example, to take education as an example, a lot of these dropout risk scores are very accurate, but the response, the sort of individual level and organizational level response to a student being labeled low risk or high risk, for example, directly impacts whether or not that student improves or improves the likelihood of graduation. So for example, if you just allocate more counselor hours, but you don't allocate other types of resources, that might not have as much of an effect. Same in the medical setting. And so what we realized was that, there was a lot of different dimensions of implementation beyond just properties of the model itself, individual decisions being made at the sort of individual operator level, organizational operation level, so how that prediction is being integrated into existing status quo, like organizational policies and default policies, and then also at a more sort of systematic level, how does the deployment of the prediction sort of interact with broader regulatory obligations or other broader societal norm obligations. And so thinking about sort of this expanding scope of consideration became a relevant factor of what we were thinking about and the implications of taking this integrated view. And so to kind of like wrap up this introduction part, one of the interesting things of sort of this workshop is that, the solution or the sort of solution space of thinking through what it means to actually, bridge, what we predict and what we do in response to these predictions and the impact of what we do in response to these predictions is a very interdisciplinary endeavor. It involves many, many, many different fields working together. And so the solution space actually kind of exists at the intersection of a lot of these different groups. And so we're super happy that this group was able to be put together. We're super happy that Simons was open to bringing, many disciplines that I'm not sure have been brought into Simons workshops before and letting, you guys come up here and sort of interact with each other very directly throughout the week. We're super excited to sort of see what happens when we kind of bring the different communities that have been thinking about these problems through their different lenses into a space like this for like a prolonged period, and actually like work together to actually see, what the bridges might be between our different communities. And so we're very thrilled that you're here. Thank you very much for coming. And with that, I think we can just sort of get right into the workshop. So thank you very much for coming here. Yeah, so I think our first speaker is Amai. Kuske.